Hi, I'm Sanjay Patel. Today we are going to learn a very important theorem of sequences known as Bolzano-Weierstrass's theorem. Okay, let us understand the statement of this theorem. It says every bounded sequence of real numbers has at least one convergent subsequence. To prove this, we are going to use the nested interval theorem, which we have proved in the earlier lectures. So just recall the statement of the nested interval theorem. It says if we have a sequence of closed intervals, say in, just understand like this, an, bn, and this sequence is a decreasing sequence of closed interval, or you can say nested sequence. So I1 is the largest interval, I1 contains I2, I2 contains I3, and so on. If we have a sequence of this type of closed and bounded intervals, which is decreasing sequence, or you can say this type of nested interval sequence, then the intersection of all these intervals from 1 to infinity is always equal to some closed interval alpha beta, where we know we have proved that this alpha is actually the limit of an, and beta is the limit of the right hand points bn of the intervals in. And if length of these intervals, suppose if I call L of in as the length of each interval, we know it is bn minus an. If this length is tending to 0 as n tends to infinity, then this intersection will be a singleton set, and that is nothing but say alpha or beta, because in that case alpha and beta will be same. So we have proved this result, and I am going to use this in our say this proof of Bolzano theorem. So let me remove this. And about the Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem, what it says that if you take any bounded sequence, remember the sequence must be bounded, then you can always find, or you can always extract a subsequence from that sequence which is always convergent, that is, it has limit. So let us start the proof. So what I am going to do is I will start with a sequence. Let xn be a bounded sequence of real numbers. Now we are going to consider two cases. The case 1 is like this. We can have the sequence xn, say at least one term which is repeated infinitely. So I am considering the first possibility, which is a trivial case. Suppose the sequence xn has at least one term Let us call this term as say x. Say one term x, which is repeated infinitely. It means this term appears in the given sequence infinitely many times. So what happens that there are infinite number of xxx in our sequence. So therefore I can extract, in this case we can consider these terms and form a sequence. We can consider a subsequence xxx. Just we collect all the terms which are repeated here, that is all the terms x which is repeated in the sequence, and we get a subsequence. So we consider this subsequence of the sequence xn, okay, and it is clearly convergent subsequence. It is clearly convergent subsequence. Why? Because this sequence is constant sequence, because xxx, this thing is a constant subsequence or a constant sequence, and therefore it is converging to x. Okay, it is converting to x. So the case is trivial. In this case we have proved that the given sequence has a convergent subsequence when if the sequence xn contains at least one term which is repeated infinitely many times. Now consider case 2, that the sequence xn does not have a term which is repeated infinitely. It has no term which is repeated infinitely. So that means all terms are distinct. So I can say thus suppose xn has infinitely many distinct terms. Infinitely many distinct terms. Okay. In this case, we want to construct a subsequence of this sequence which is convergent. That is our aim of the Bolzano-Weierstrass theorem. So let us see how to construct a subsequence, and for that I will be using that nested interval theorem. Just keep in mind. So what I will do here is note that the sequence xn is bounded. We are given that the sequence xn is bounded. So therefore there exists a positive real number m such that mod of xn is less than or equal to m. Correct? So I can say this implies minus m is less than or equal to xn is less than or equal to m, and this is true for every n belongs to n. Here also I can write for every n belongs to n. Okay, so remember that all terms of the sequence lies between minus m2 plus m. Let us put the interval capital I1 is equal to say minus m comma plus m, and this I would like to call as close interval a1 comma b1. Correct? Remember that this interval I1 has all the terms of the sequence, and the sequence has infinitely many distinct terms. The sequence has infinitely many distinct terms. So what I will get here is on this say I can draw a number line. So we have the interval minus m to plus m, like this, which I am calling a1 v1. So I will be writing here only a1 v1. This is our main interval. This is equal to minus m, and this is, just let me remove this. This is equal to minus m, and this is equal to plus m. Okay. So what we do next is we take a midpoint of this closed interval a1 b1. You know how we can define a midpoint? The midpoint is sum of these two endpoints divided by 2. So I am taking a point, say here C1, which is equal to a1 plus b1 by 2. Okay, it is equal to a1 plus b1 by 2. So let us write down. So let C1 is equal to a1 plus b1 by 2, and because of this midpoint, what will happen is this closed interval is divided into two sub-intervals. One is closed interval a1 c1, other is closed interval c1 b1. Okay, this is c1 b1, and the other interval is a1 c1. Okay, so it is divided into these two sub-intervals. Remember that all the terms of the sequence are say infinitely, the sequence xn has infinitely distinct terms, and all terms of the sequence are lying in this closed interval a1 b1. So we have two possibilities. Either all terms, this closed interval a1 c1 contains infinitely many points, or infinitely many distinct points of the sequence xn, or this part c1 b1 contains infinitely many distinct points of the sequence xn. Okay, it is not possible that both the intervals contains only finitely many terms of the sequence xn. Why? Because if the closed interval this a1 c1 contains only finitely many terms, the closed interval c1 b1 contains only finitely many terms, then what will happen is totally there will be only finitely many terms between a1 and b1. But we have assumed that the sequence has infinitely distinct terms. So this is not possible. So let me write some details about this. So this implies the interval I1 is divided into two sub-intervals, say a1 c1 and c1 b1. Now this implies either closed interval a1 comma c1 or closed interval c1 comma b1 contains infinitely many distinct terms of the sequence xn. The reason is because if this is not true, then what will happen? Otherwise means suppose a1 c1 and c1 b1 does not contain infinitely many terms, both contains finitely many terms. Otherwise the sequence xn has only finitely many terms, okay, in I1, that is close interval a1 b1, and this is a contradiction to this is a contradiction, and a contradiction to the fact that sequence has infinitely many distinct terms. So both the intervals cannot contain say finitely many terms. At least either a1 c1 or c1 b1 must contain infinite number of terms of the sequence. Let us assume that this closed interval a1 c1, this part contains infinitely many distinct terms of the sequence xn. So without loss of generality, so let us assume without loss of generality that the closed interval a1 c1 contains infinitely many terms. Infinitely many terms of the sequence xn. Okay. Before I proceed, just note that the interval I1, which we have defined earlier, this interval has length I1, length of I1 is equal to b1 minus a1, which is equal to what? M minus m, that is equal to 2m. You know how to find the length of interval, right hand point minus left hand point. So this minus this, m minus m is 2m. So this is the length of the starting interval I1. I am now going to consider the closed interval a1 c1, which contains infinitely many terms of the sequence xn. So let us put the I2 is equal to closed interval a1 c1, and this I want to rename as a2 b2. So what I am doing is I am labeling this a1 as a2 and c1 as b2. I am giving another name for this interval a1 c1. So let us see what happens here. We have started with the interval minus m to plus m, which was a1 b1. Okay, and this is minus m, this is plus m. We have divided this into 2 halves by taking c1 is equal to a1 plus b1 by 2. So we get these two intervals. One is closed interval a1 c1 and other is c1 b1, and we have assumed that this a1 c1 contains infinitely many terms. So let me again tell you that this interval a1 to b1 is I1. This interval is I1. Okay. Next, I am taking this interval, say close interval a1 to c1, this, and I am labeling in these symbols a2 and b2, and this interval contains, this interval in a2 b2 contains infinitely many terms of the sequence xn that we have assumed. Okay, so we have assumed that this a1 c1 contains infinitely many terms of the sequence xn. Note that the length of the interval a2, length of the interval I2 rather, is what? This b2 minus a2, which we can write as c1 minus a1. What is c1 minus a1? It is the length of half of the length of the original interval. The whole interval is minus m to plus m, its length is 2m, so this length is obviously capital M. Okay, so one can also say that this is equal to half of the length of b1 minus c1, because c1 is the midpoint. This is b1 minus c1 and half length is 1 by 2 times b1 minus c1. Also, another important thing here is that the interval I2 is subset of interval I1, correct? Now we again divide the interval a to b2, this interval a to b2, into two parts by taking another point, say here the midpoint I am taking now C2 as A2 plus B2 by 2. So again I will get two intervals, that is A2 C2 and another interval is C2. This is C2 and this is B2. Okay, so let me write down that. Again put C2 is equal to A2 plus B2 by 2. Okay, and as a result the interval A to B2 is divided into two subintervals, A1, sorry, not A1, it is A2, C2 and another subinterval is C2, B2. Just see here, this is A2, C2 and another subinterval is C2, B2. Again, one of these intervals, we have already assumed that A1, C1, this original interval A2, B2 contains infinite many terms of the point of the sequence xn. So either the subinterval A2, C2 or the subinterval this one C2, B2, this subinterval contains infinite many distinct points of the sequence xn. So otherwise again we'll get a contradiction to the same fact. So by similar arguments, as above, we can say similarly either A2 C2 or C2 B2 contains infinitely many distinct terms of the sequence xn. Okay, so let us assume that the interval C2 B2, suppose the interval C2 comma B2 contains infinitely many distinct terms, of the sequence xn, Okay, what I am going to do is I will call this new interval C2 B2 by labeling as I3 is equal to C2 B2 and I will call it closed interval A3 B3. So what we are doing here is just a minute. We are renaming this interval C2 B2, this one, this I am calling as A3 and this I am calling as B3. So C2 becomes A3 and B2 becomes A3. So now I am taking this interval which contains infinitely many points. Remember, this interval is our interval I3 and this I3 is contained in I2. This is I2. This interval is I2. Okay, I2 is subset of I1, I2 and I3 is subset of I2. So we are getting a decreasing sequence of closed intervals like this. Okay, so just note that I3 is subset of I2 and length of the interval I3, that is B3 minus A3, and it is half of the length of the previous interval, which is I2, and therefore I can write it is equal to 1 half B2 minus A2. Okay, and remember that I3 contains infinitely many distinct terms of the sequence xn. So what happens finally is if we continue this process, then we can obtain or we get a sequence of closed and bounded intervals as described above. Say let us call that sequence as In, which is In, with the property that, or let me write with the following property. With the following properties. This sequence I1, I2, I3 has the following properties. The first thing is it is a nested sequence of intervals. So I1 is the largest one. So I1 contains I2, I2 contains I3, I3 contains I4, and so on. So that is In contains In plus 1 for every n. The second remark is the length of the interval In, okay, is equal to what? For this I have to explain here. Just recall temporary length of interval I1 is B1 minus A1. Length of interval I2 is equal to 1 half of B1 minus A1. Okay, and length of interval I3 is 1 half of B2 minus A2, but B2 minus A2 is the length of I2, and therefore this is 1 half of B1 minus A1, because length of I2 is nothing but B2 minus A2. So I can write this 1 by 2 times B1 minus A1. So finally we get 1 upon 2 square into B1 minus A1. So remember, length of I3 is 1 upon 2 square raised to 1 upon 2 square times B1 minus A1. So I can write the length of interval In in general form as 1 upon 2 raised to n minus 1. See, when it is 3, it is 2 raised to 2. Okay, so 2 square. When it is length of I2, it is 2 raised to 1. So I can write this is equal to length of In is equal to 1 upon 2 raised to n minus 1 into B1 minus A1. Okay, so this is a very, very important thing and will be useful. Now let me remove this. And the third important condition I want to note down, or the third important property about this sequence, is that every interval In contains infinitely many distinct points. Infinitely many distinct points. infinitely many distinct points of xn. So these are the three properties of the sequence in we have constructed, and you can see that it is a nested sequence of closed and bounded intervals. And if you observe the length of the interval in, which is this bn minus en, it is actually this number. So I can say the important conclusion in this, that here limit n tends to infinity of length of in is equal to limit n tends to infinity 1 upon 2 raised to n minus 1 into b1 minus a1. b1 minus a1 is a fixed number. You know, it is actually 2m, and 2m is a constant, positive constant. So this tends to 0. We know that this tends to 0 as n tends to infinity. Okay, so what I have proved is length of in tends to 0 as n tends to infinity. So we can apply the nested interval theorem here, because this sequence of intervals satisfies all the conditions. So I can say by nested interval theorem, the intersection of all these intervals from 1 to infinity is equal to singleton set, singleton x. Okay, for some x belongs to R. So there exists some real number x such that intersection of in is equal to singleton x. This is an important conclusion here. Remember that this I1, I2, I3 is a nested sequence of intervals, and by the nested interval theorem, since the limit of all the length of the interval tends to 0, the intersection will be singleton set. Okay, we have also proved that in the nested interval theorem. So this is one thing. What we are going to prove is this. Next, we shall construct a subsequence. So remember, the theorem is not over. We shall construct a subsequence, say xnk of the sequence xn such that xnk converges to this number x. If I prove this, then the theorem is over, because we wanted to find a subsequence of the given sequence which is convergent. So let us see how to construct this subsequence. Okay. So let us see how to construct this subsequence. First, we choose a point from the sequence xn. Okay, say xn1. Okay, xn1 such that this xn1 belongs to the I1, the first interval. Okay, we have infinitely many closed and bound intervals, I1, I2, I3, and so on. I1 contains I2, I2 contains I3, and so on. So from the sequence x1, x2, x3, and so on, all the terms of the sequence given, what I am taking is first the smallest positive integer n1, where n1 is the smallest positive integer, that is the smallest subscript of the sequence xn, for which xn1 belongs to this interval I1. Okay. Next, we choose. Let me write this way. Now we choose the next smallest positive integer. Next smallest positive integer, say n2, okay, with the property that this n2 is greater than n1, okay, and this xn2, the corresponding term of the sequence, belongs to the second interval I2. Remember, this is possible because here I2 is subset of I1, and I1 contains infinitely distinct terms of the sequence xn. First we have chosen one term xn1 and like this, and we continue this process. Next, in the same way, we can choose another integer, positive integer n3, positive integer n3, which is greater than n2, and such that this xn3 belongs to I3, and we continue this process. Okay, so as a result, if we continue this, or if we repeat this process infinitely many times, repeat this process infinitely, we get a subsequence xn1, xn2, xn3 and so on, which I can write as xnk of the sequence xn with the property that xnk belongs to this ik for k is equal to 1, 2, 3 and so on. So xn1 belongs to I1, xn2 belongs to I2 and so on. So that is we have ak is less than or equal to xnk, let me write again, ak is less than or equal to xnk is less than or equal to bk, because we know that the interval ik has the endpoints ak comma bk. So this xnk lies between ak and bk for every k. Let us call this as result number 1. Again, recall that our intersection of all these intervals in is equal to singleton x. Okay, I may also call this as, instead of n, I want to use the subscript k. Intersection of all the intervals ik for k equal to 1 to infinity is xk. So that means this x belongs to all the sets, all the intervals ik where k is equal to 1 to 3, because if some point is in the intersection, means that point belongs to every set in that intersection. And this gives me, because ik you know is ak bk, so this gives me ak less than or equal to x less than or equal to bk, and this is our result number 2. Okay, this is our result number 2. So this is result 1. Sorry, this is result 1 and this is result number 2. What I want to do is I want to take 1 minus 2. Okay, means first I multiply this inequality number 2 by minus 1. So what I will get is this. If I multiply it by minus 1, I will get minus bk less than or equal to minus x less than or equal to minus ak. When you multiply by a negative number, inequality will it will be reversed or it will be changed. So I'm multiplying this whole inequality number 2 by minus 1. Now if I add these two inequalities, 1 and this new result 2 dash, what I will get is this thing. So adding these two, adding the two inequalities, we get, see, first one is this, so I can write AK minus BK less than or equal to XNK minus X less than or equal to BK minus AK. Let me show you both the inequalities so we'll understand. Adding this, adding this term and this term, that is AK minus BK, adding XNK and this minus X, we get XNK minus X, and this I can rewrite, this inequality I can rewrite as, because this is same as, this is same as minus of BK minus AK, so I can rewrite this inequality in this form: mod of XNK minus X less than or equal to BK minus AK. Because if we have minus this result, minus y less than or equal to x less than or equal to plus y is same as mod of x is less than or equal to y. So I'm using this inequality to write down this in the modulus form. Okay, and remember, this thing is true for every k is equal to 1, 2, 3 and so on, means for every k belongs to n. So what I can write next in more detail, as this is always non-negative, so I can write 0 less than or equal to mod of XNK minus x, this is less than or equal to BK minus AK for every k belongs to n, and therefore I can take the limit as n tends to k tends to infinity. So taking limit as k tends to infinity, we get here 0 less than or equal to limit k tends to infinity of mod of XNK minus x less than or equal to limit k tends to infinity of BK minus AK. But we know that this limit is 0 because of the properties of the intervals which we have constructed. And let us recall that result. We have written 3 properties of this sequence, nested interval sequence of intervals. See this. This tends to 0 as n tends to infinity. We have already proved here. So what I can say that in this limit, we are getting right hand limit and left hand limit. This limit is 0 and this limit is also 0. Okay, this limit is also 0 and this limit is 0. So limit of this middle sequence is sandwiched between these two, and hence by sandwich theorem I can say limit k tends to infinity of mod of XNK minus x is equal to 0 because of sandwich theorem. Okay, and if limit as k tends to infinity mod of sequence is 0, I can remove the modulus sign and write limit k tends to infinity XNK minus x is equal to 0. Okay, by result, whenever mod of xn tends to 0, xn also tends to 0. We have proved that thing. And this gives me, by working rule, I can say now directly that limit k tends to infinity, x and k is equal to x. Thus, x and k converges to x. So we have found a subsequence. Thus, x and k is the required subsequence of the sequence xn such that x and k converges to x. And that is, x and k is convergent. It is convergent subsequence. Hence, the theorem is proved. We have shown that every bounded sequence of real numbers has at least one convergent subsequence. There can be many also, but this theorem gives you the guarantee if a sequence is bounded. So bounded condition is important for the sequence of real numbers. And using this very important theorem, we'll be proving later on that set of real numbers is a complete matrix space. Okay, what is a complete matrix space? You know what is a matrix space, and we know the definition of complete matrix space means if every Cauchy sequence is convergent, okay, then it is called a complete matrix space. So we'll be proving that every Cauchy sequence of real numbers is always convergent using this Bolzano-Weierstrass's theorem, and that is our main aim of this chapter. So the main aim is to establish the completeness of R. Okay, we'll be defining in the next lecture what is a Cauchy sequence, and we'll be proving some interesting results about Cauchy sequence, and then finally we'll be deriving that every Cauchy sequence is always convergent. Okay, so till then, thank you.